Thank you for coming out tonight. My name's Tom Coleman. I'm the acting city manager for the city of Newark. I appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to come. This is the fourth of our 9 planned town hall meetings for the referendum. This is the first one after council finalized the questions for inclusion in the referendum. Just for as far as format, we'll hold all the questions to the end. We'll try and get through the presentation. It's a pretty lengthy one. So I don't want it to take too much longer than it will otherwise take, so we'll hold them for the end. Tonight we're going to go over some of the more frequently asked questions that we receive about the city's infrastructure and the referendum process. Then we'll provide an overview of the projects that we're asking to have, that are in the referendum. After that, we'll move into a financial discussion with our finance director on why debt makes sense. We'll review the available funding sources to the city and our current and proposed debt service obligations. Then at the end, we'll have our question and answer session. Tonight, you're going to hear from myself, Dave Del Grande, who's our finance director in the back, Tim Pulaski, who's the acting public works and water resources director, and Joe Spadafino, who's our parks and recreation director. Tonight, you're going to hear Dave, Tim, and I refer to the term capital in reference to spending and budgeting, so I wanted to provide a definition. Our charter defines capital as any project or equipment, including any extension or addition thereto or thereof, having a life expectancy in excess of or to be financed over a period greater than 6 years or a value exceeding $20,000. All right, that's great. What are some examples of capital? For us, capital projects are usually things like what we have listed here, our infrastructure. The majority of our capital spending is going to be on an item like this, mainly because these items are very expensive. And much like your house or your car, they need to be maintained or replaced periodically. So how much infrastructure do we have? A lot. I'm going to walk you through each of our utilities and give a quick overview so you have an idea of the scale. We have the most water infrastructure by a large margin, and most of these items are quite expensive. For example, it costs us around $1.2 million to replace 1 mile of small diameter water main like what's in front of your house. In total, we estimate the replacement value of our water infrastructure to around $200 million if we had to replace all of it today. That's almost $6,000 worth of water infrastructure for every resident, and that's just for water. We also have a lot of sewer infrastructure. The total replacement value for sewer is less than water because it can be more easily rehabilitated, often without digging up the street, but the value is still more than $67 million. Stormwater is even more than sewer at around $100 million. Stormwater is somewhat unique that we have different pipe materials with dramatically different life expectancies to the point that we track them differently. Right now, we're really only concerned about one type of pipe. It's corrugated metal pipe, which we refer to as CMP. CMP lasts around 35 to 40 years on average, and we have around 5 miles of it. This is the pipe that we're really concerned about now because most of it is already at or beyond its expected life. The rest of our pipe is generally going to be reinforced concrete pipe or high-density polyethylene, both that have an average life of about 100 years. In addition to our pipes, we have 65 city-maintained stormwater ponds and facilities mostly in residential neighborhoods. Our electric infrastructure is made up of substations, lines, transformers, and our McKee's solar facility off Cleveland Avenue. We estimate the replacement value of our electric utilities infrastructure to be $50 million or more. And that's going to be I would say our least confident estimate. It's likely higher, but we went with a low estimate at this time while we're working on it. In addition to our traditional utilities, we also have our parking infrastructure consisting of our downtown parking lots and meters. Our parking fund is treated the same as a traditional enterprise utility in Newark, with revenues being kept separate from the general fund aside from a margin transfer, which is essentially the city's profit margin. Lastly, we have our general fund infrastructure, which includes city-maintained streets, City Hall, the police station, our parks, and other city-maintained facilities. This is the infrastructure that's supported by taxes, fees, and margin transfers from the city's various utilities. In total, we estimate the current replacement value of our infrastructure and capital assets at around $500 million. That's a huge number for a city of just over 33,000 people. That means we have over $15,000 worth of infrastructure for every resident in the city. The vast majority of it's underground or at least out of sight, out of mind. So it's easy to forget about until you hit a pothole with your car, or your toilet won't flush, or the lights go out. Now, while it's helpful to know how much of everything we have, it's even better to know what condition it's in so we can plan. So what is the condition of our current infrastructure? I'm going to go through each type in the same order, and you'll see we have different amounts of information for each one. Starting with water, I'm going to first focus on mains because they make up the majority of the value of water's assets. Getting good condition assessment on water mains is difficult because they're under pressure and they need to remain in service during the assessment. We've begun piloting technologies that will indirectly measure the remaining life, but widespread implementation is still in development. In the meantime, we use a combination of our water main break history, water quality complaints, pipe age, pipe material, and industry guidelines to estimate the remaining service life and prioritize replacement. As I'll show in the next few slides, a lot of our water mains are going to hit or exceed their expected lifespan and expire in the near future. It's important to point out that expiring doesn't mean the pipe will stop working though, but I'll explain more shortly. This is what we like to refer to as the bathtub diagram, and it shows a general failure pattern for pipes. You'll often get a quick round of failure right at the beginning when a new pipe goes in and any of the manufacturing defects fail early. Then you'll have a long, constant failure rate phase. You might get one every 10 years. And then at the end of the pipe's life, it enters the wear out phase and the break rate increases, often rapidly. This is most often due to corrosion. The expected life varies depending on the material and the manufacturing methodology. The longer the life of the material, the longer that nice constant failure rate phase in the middle. Generally, the older the main, the longer the life, until very recently, that is backwards, the older the longer, until very recently when we started using some advanced laying practices. Our oldest mains, like what's on Main Street, were very thick with an expected life of 100 to 120 years. Mains installed in the middle of the 20th century have a much shorter life, sometimes as low as 55 years. And then mains installed since 2016 are back up to 100 years or more. So it does vary based off age. Now this slide gets into what I mentioned earlier about how a pipe expires. The green line is the cost to operate an existing pipe. As you can see, the cost increases as the pipe gets older and it begins to fail more frequently. At a certain point, the failure rate gets high enough that the cost to make repairs, coupled with the inconvenience to customers, makes it cheaper to replace it than leave it in service. The break-even age will depend on, like I mentioned earlier, the pipe material, the manufacturing methodology, but also heavily on soil conditions, because the soil is what causes a lot of the corrosion. We're working right now to develop an accurate estimate for all of our 140 miles of pipe, but that's going to take some time. For the sake of this presentation, we're going to show you information using recommendations from the American Water Works Association, or AWWA, which is to assume 70 years on average. We feel that based on which areas of the city are experiencing advanced failure rates, this is generally going to be accurate for Newark, or at least accurate enough to give you an idea of the city's average condition. So this is a map of our water system with the mains color-coded based on the expected life. I've got it in tabular form on the next slide as well. So the pipes that are red have already expired, and the pipes in orange, yellow, and light blue are set to expire in the next 15 years. Now there are some mains on here that are listed as expired, like Main Street, that likely do have some service life left despite being over 110 years old. But there are some mains that are shown with remaining life that are likely already into the expired category. Because of that, try not to focus on the individual locations and instead more on the general magnitude of each category. So this is a little easier to read. So this slide shows the same data there instead, with all of our mains broken out into 5-year categories. So today, around 15 miles of mains are expired, which is around 12% of our system. Looking at all of the pipes in our system, 15 years from now, that number is going to be 74 miles, absent a continued or increased effort to replace mains. That's 57% of the system. It'll be 59 miles even if we hit our current target of replacing 1 mile every year. That's 42% of the system. And this doesn't count our raw water pipes that carry untreated water and are going to be in a similar condition. Based on a recent study by Utah State University, the nationwide average is 16% expired. So we're currently doing better than average, so that's good. But you can see it's not going to be that way for long. Nationally, the percentage of expired pipes has doubled since 2012 from 8% to 16%. So what we're seeing is being seen nationwide. And the break rate for cast iron pipe, which makes up much of Newark's pipe infrastructure, has increased 46% over that same term nationwide. So this is a problem that's accelerating. So what does it mean for Newark? Well, we should plan for more water main breaks and interruptions in service. Here we've charted the number of water main breaks every year going back to 1977, which is the first year that we have records. There's a definite trend, which is only going to accelerate as a higher percentage of our mains move into that expired category. Each one of these breaks is generally accompanied by a service outage and occasionally by a boil water order, which can last 24 to 48 hours. These outages have a negative effect on quality of life and, if near a business, on their revenue. Like I said earlier, the pipes don't stop working, they just stop working well. Moving on from water mains, starting in 2011, the city began increasing our water rates from the artificially low rate that was in place at the time. This has allowed us to really do a lot of capital improvements over the last few years, and we've ramped up our capital maintenance efforts. While water mains make up the majority of our infrastructure, our other water facilities have a much shorter life, so they punch above their weight from a budget perspective. We've been very busy over the last 7 years, and we've completed over $17 million in water capital fund projects. We have 2 water treatment plant projects that are currently underway or are expected to be completed in the next 12 months. The first one just went online last week or 2 weeks ago, which was at our South Wellfield treatment plant, making some modifications to our pH system there. The second is a project to convert from chlorine gas to a liquid system at our surface water plant and make a bunch of other upgrades to the building envelope. On the sewer side, we've been working to inspect and develop a prioritization for our rehab work. So far, we've inspected around 15% of the system and identified around $4 million of high priority repairs. We began making many of the repairs during 2017. We'll have another project underway this summer. It's actually underway right now. Since 2011, we've spent nearly $4 million on sewer capital projects and have rebuilt all of our sewer pump stations to modern standards. On the stormwater side, we've been focused on corrugated metal pipe, like I mentioned earlier, since it has such a short service life, and it's been failing all over the city. Starting in 2016, we completed a citywide condition assessment of all the known corrugated metal pipe and prioritized the repairs. In total, we identified $3.4 million in repairs that we'll need to complete over the next 10 years. As many of you are likely aware, Council authorized the creation of a stormwater utility, which became effective on January 1st of this year. Because of that, we have a stable funding source that's been designed to provide us an adequate amount of money to meet our operating expenses and to complete the repairs that have been identified over the next 5 years. So that's a good thing. But the current rate will not cover the cost of the proposed Rodney project, which would result in the need to increase the median residential stormwater bill by a little over $1 a month. For our road network, we have a full pavement management program where we complete an annual inspection of all our roads, rate them, and then have those ratings run through an optimization program to develop an optimal project. If we were to keep city-maintained roadways at their current average citywide, we need to spend around $1.75 million a year, every year. We've only been able to do that number one time since 2011. We also have about $1.5 million in parks capital maintenance scheduled over the next 5 years. So how did we get ourselves into this position? Well, up until now, absent a few specific projects like the reservoir and the South Wellfield, we've been using only cash for our capital projects. And that limits our ability to tackle large projects because they crowd out smaller, less sexy replacement type projects and preventative maintenance. It's a lot more exciting to have a new ribbon cutting than replacing an underground pipe that's generally worked for your entire life. Our water and sewer rates are entirely consumption-based, so they fluctuate considerably with the weather, which results in a less predictable revenue stream. Over the last 3 years, we've lost around $3 million in water revenue because our water sales have underproduced, we'll say. In addition to this, around 50% of Newark's land area is tax exempt, which puts us in a really deep hole when it comes to paying for our general fund services like police. We fill this hole by transferring about 20% of our utility revenue from everything but stormwater into the general fund, and that's all money that could have gone towards infrastructure maintenance. The biggest issue we're facing, though, is that we're entering the first round of the replacement era. So historically, we've never had to pay for most of the infrastructure we have. It was paid for by developers or the federal government through grants. We're now approaching the first replacement cycle for most of our assets, which can really be thought of as liabilities because we don't really have a choice but to maintain them. Even mains installed by or for the city were originally assessed directly against the adjoining property owners. Because of this, our rate and tax structure has never had to pay for most of this infrastructure, and our revenue demands are going to increase significantly over the next 20 years as we start to deal with it. In addition to this, a large majority of Newark has been developed in an unsustainable development pattern, and that's single-family, suburban-style homes. If you live in a single-family detached home, I can almost guarantee you're not paying enough to cover the infrastructure necessary to support your house based on our current utility rate structure and tax levels. For example, if you live in a house with a 100-foot wide lot, your taxes need to support, in addition to police and other general fund expenses, paving and maintenance of at least 50 feet of street frontage. The same goes for water, sewer, and your electric infrastructure. Using our current cost for water main replacement, 50 feet of water main costs over $11,000 to replace. Assuming 10% of your water bill goes towards infrastructure, which has generally been our average, it'll take over 300 years for you to pay off that small section of main, let alone all the other infrastructure that supports it, like our water treatment plants and our booster stations. Fortunately, we have locations like our downtown and our industrial users that are able to offset a lot of the shortcomings of the neighborhood areas, where a house may take over 300 years to pay off a section of main. A building like 58 East Main Street, the one there in the bottom right-hand corner, will do it every 2 to 3 years. We see a very similar pattern in our tax structure. So here's a still in development map that shows whether a property is paying enough in taxes to pay for the general fund services it gets. While it isn't complete yet, the general idea and scope is not likely to be significantly different once it is. Based on our preliminary estimates, all the parcels in red do not provide enough in tax revenue to cover the cost of providing them with general fund services. Some may come closer than others, but they still don't cover their cost. Parcels that have a positive value are shown in yellow, blue, and green, and those are the properties that make up the difference and balance the budget. What you can see is that in general, single-family detached housing is negative, which means if we were to approve a new single-family neighborhood today, it will make us poorer as a community, as we'll be taking on more liabilities and revenues. Higher density development, on the other hand, like townhomes and downtown mixed-use projects, will help reduce the need for future tax increases because they pay more than their fair share. Now, if any of you live in a condo or a townhouse and you've got friends that live in a single-family home, I don't want you to start giving them funny looks and stop hanging out with them. It's not what I'm trying to say, but I just wanted to point out, there are certain development patterns that aren't productive for the city, so we can make smarter decisions moving forward. And the first step to dealing with a problem is admitting you have a problem, and we have a problem in that a lot of our city costs more to maintain than it brings in. So I know this presentation has been a lot of doom and gloom, but it's not all bad news, and it definitely isn't unique to Newark. Cities all across the nation are looking at the same problem, whether they know it or not. Illinois, for example, just determined they need to spend $21 billion per year on infrastructure, when historically they've spent closer to $3 billion. When you consider their entire budget for the whole state is only $38 billion, you can see what kind of problem they're facing. Fortunately for us, I think we're in a much better place than a lot of other cities for several reasons. Firstly, there's a will on council to tackle the problem, which is evidenced by the fact that we're here today talking about taking on debt to start getting in front of it. We're also a relatively compact city compared to our peers. Dover, for example, has 2.5 times our land area and only 10% more people. So they're in a much worse situation than us. We're in the very fortunate position of having the STAR campus, which is going to be bringing all new revenue to the city soon. So every private project that's completed at STAR will bring us tax revenue and utility revenue that we haven't had before at all, or at least not in a long time. Tim, I'm just going to go over some of our projects that are included in the referendum. But before he begins, I want to point out that all the projects that we're over today were included in our 5-year capital budget before. So none of these projects, the referendum isn't paying for stuff that we're planning. It's paying for stuff that we are planning on doing and we have been planning on doing. So with that, I'll hand it to Tim.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Hopefully everybody can hear me. And I usually promise that I'm not going to ramble. I'm going to do what I can to stick to script here and make sure that I get the information across to you. Many of these projects that we're going to talk about today are projects or ongoing projects or programs which you may have heard Tom or I discuss or bring contracts to council in previous years. Others are overdue rehabilitation or upgrades to facilities that provide our water and other services throughout the city. I'm going to give you a high-level overview, but please feel free to reach out to me after the meeting here today, or at the boards just a little later, or by email or at my office. We've actually set up an email address for general questions that folks have about Newark, and conveniently it's called Ask Newark at newark.de.us. So Tom will bring that up on a slide a little later, but I know when we get into the details, some of you want a little more detail than others. I'm happy to provide that in a different setting, but I'll give you a high-level overview tonight. So we're going to talk about water projects first, and the first project on the list is the Laird Tract well field restoration. This is a new project that has been contemplated over the last few years, and it will double our drought resiliency and bring back some production that was furloughed when the reservoir came online. So these wells are within the protected White Clay Creek State Park for the most part, and will be part of a long-term solution to drawing our drinking water from the most protected areas of the city. And I mentioned the resiliency at the reservoir. This water, we actually have to, when we're in a severe drought, we have to stop taking water from the White Clay Creek. These wells would be able to continue in production and fill the reservoir, and then we can continue to use that water from the reservoir. So it would effectively double the drought resiliency that the reservoir provides. The second, here's luckily somebody came up with an acronym for this. It's Water Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System, or SCADA. This essentially allows us to be in one or more places, or two or more places at one time. This is a computer-based program that tells us what's going on at all of our water treatment facilities and all of our water pump stations and water tanks at one time on a computer or on a smartphone, and gives us the ability to make changes on the fly, shut down production if necessary, and change the production schedule. We typically have one person on 24 hours a day. They can't be everywhere at all times. This helps us to fill that gap. The South Well Field, which Tom mentioned earlier, is another one of our treatment facilities. Many of you may be aware that the groundwater under the South Well Field treatment plant was recently listed on the EPA's National Register, or Superfund as it is more commonly known. We actually had a meeting here with the public in this same room. The good news is that the contaminants found in the water are easily treatable by our current system. However, the current system is nearing the end of its useful life and needs to be replaced. Other modern upgrades are being vetted for inclusion in this facility upgrade. Tom mentioned water main replacement in a good amount of detail. We are in need of a system-wide study to assess the condition of all of our water mains. However, we do have enough information and data to target and fix the worst of what we know within this 5-year CIP cycle, which is the Capital Improvement Program cycle. And finally, on water, we have water tank rehabilitation. I believe on the boards here there is a photo of a before and after on a few of our water tanks that we have completed. We still have 5 tanks that have lead-based coatings on the outside. I want to be clear that that's on the outside. The inside does not have any lead-based coatings. And while the state is beginning to draft legislation on the methods of removal of this lead paint, we are actually exploring options to remove and replace the tanks rather than deal with the dry blasting in proximity to city residents. Sometimes the houses were built around the water tanks, and they're pretty close. So instead of actually having to remove this paint, we can remove the whole tank and replace it, but that's still in development. I do want to point out that if we do go the dry blasting route, we will follow the state regulations as well as new city code that we've been asked to come up with as a result of some previous work that we've done. So the sewer, moving on to sewer, it's about $3.9 million or $4 million for the sewer project. And as Tom mentioned earlier, our sewers are generally easier to rehabilitate because you don't have to dig them up. We do have, this project is inclusive of several steps. It looks like it's one project, but it actually has several steps. The first step is to identify the critical lines and perform inspections using closed circuit television or CCTV. Essentially, when we block the pipe and we send a camera in and we look for imperfections. The CCTV inspections are then reviewed and the defects in the pipes prioritized in a report which we utilize to group the projects that are identified for similar rehabilitation methods. Some we do have to dig up and replace, they're just that bad. Some we can put a liner in, others there's just one small spot we can dig down, fix that one little spot, and the rest of them are good to go. Sometimes we fix a little spot, then we line through it. These generally give us another 50 to 75 years of life in the same pipe that may be 50 to 75 years old. So as Tom mentioned, we have identified roughly $3 to $4 million worth of repairs after inspecting about 15% of the system. And it should be noted that we have completed close to $1 million of these specific repairs in the last few years, and we actually have a contractor that's been in and out of town the last few weeks making some of these repairs. If you tried to get out of McDonald's last week on Main Street, there was a contractor there. It's very quick and easy, and they get in and out, but sometimes it is a small inconvenience, but not as inconvenient as having to dig up the road and repair the road. So we'll move on to stormwater. This again is one project, but as I'll explain, it's been split somewhat into two projects. Hopefully many of you have heard or seen our proposal for purchasing the former Rodney dorms and demolishing them to make way for a stormwater management pond with park amenities. If you look over on the board on the right-hand side, that has one of the concept plans, which I'll describe in a little bit. That step's closer than I thought. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the city to acquire a piece of land well situated to help achieve stormwater quality and quantity improvements. The parcel sits at the top of a large drainage area where little to no stormwater controls exist. Managing stormwater near its source is a key benefit to downstream systems. The parcel is also situated in an area that lacks city-owned open space in close proximity to our award-winning Main Street. We didn't actually think of it that way when we got started, but we looked at a map of all the city-owned parcels and parks, and the downtown area really had, almost a donut hole there that this parcel can fill in. Approximately 6,000 residents live within a 15-minute walk of the property, and nearly 2/3 of our residents live within a 10-minute bike ride of the site. So the combination of the pond and the park would address all these important issues, as well as serve as a showcase for our educational efforts to show residents and visitors how they can contribute to keeping our stormwater and ultimately our drinking water clean and safe. It's important to note that the concept plan for the pond and park features presented is the project of an extensive public process that included input and suggestions from many residents in a year-long effort throughout 2017. Although the project vision was to develop the pond and park together as complementary to one another, we are able to break out the stormwater management needs from the aesthetically pleasing park amenities into two questions on the referendum. A yes vote on Rodney, question 1, will authorize council to borrow money from the state revolving loan fund for the purchase of the property, the demolition, environmental remediation, pond construction, and some minor amenities to allow site accessibility and maintain the current pedestrian pathway through the site. Minor landscaping and pond edge treatments would also be included. The estimated cost associated with this question is $6.5 million. A yes vote on Rodney, question 2, will authorize council to borrow money from the state revolving loan fund to fund the majority of the park amenities that were discussed and chosen as part of our public workshops in the summer of 2017. Residents who participated in this discussion agreed that the passive recreation coupled with small classroom space and picnic areas was the best fit for this space. An accessible fishing pier was included, but it's important to note that the pond won't be stocked. Fish and other things birds and other things will slowly bring fish, and there's very few ponds that don't eventually get fish, and if there's not that many, it makes them harder to catch, it makes it more fun, or more exhausting. So extensive educational signage and elements will be integrated into the site to show residents and visitors the role stormwater management plays in our ecosystem and in our city. As Dave Del Grande will discuss later, the funding for the park amenities through the revolving loan fund are locked at 2%, and the approval is awaiting our signature. Funding these upgrades in future years with other sources of funding will cost more money overall. So now that there is a bucket of projects that are part of the general fund that I'll go over a little bit. These are general fund projects that are included because they are necessary for the operation of the city, yet they always seem to get a lower priority when compared to the utilities and other larger projects. Our ADA transition plan is actually a federal requirement that we upgrade or modify our ADA facilities throughout the city. Most of this is what, if you've noticed around, maybe around, if you are a resident around town, you can see that they put the domes on the sidewalks at the intersections and things. Again, these are federal requirements that we upgrade the handicap accessibility and transportation routes to comply with current ADA standards. We have replaced nearly 1,400 of the 1,800 existing ramps, as well as upgraded many city-owned facilities, including the Wilson Center, and City Hall itself actually had some ADA upgrades in the past year. As I like to mention that, once we're about 10 years off, we do about 40 of these ramps a year. And I do certainly understand that the federal government will likely change their mind in 10 years and we'll start all over again. But for now, this is the standard, and we need to keep up with our ADA transition plan. Moving on to some parks projects, there's a hard surface improvement project as an upgrade and maintain some of the infrastructure and amenities in our very well-used park system. Where possible, we piggyback these projects on the larger street paving projects so we get better, to secure better pricing and economies of scale. These are parking lots and things that the Parks Department uses for their tennis courts and basketball courts and hockey courts. I know hockey court sounds funny, but they do have a hockey court. It's a street hockey court. So, so our field operations complex is where we store all of our equipment and material for maintaining the streets, water lines, parks, sewers, and other items in the city that we've previously discussed. We lack storage space to keep this expensive equipment out of the weather. Phase one of the master plan for the field operations complex was to build a new salt shed. That was approved in 2016 and completed in 2017, and it allowed us to keep it allowed us to keep enough salt on hand during the winter so that we didn't have to fight at the Port of Wilmington over a barge of salt that comes in. We had enough salt to last through the winter, and that's what our intentions are going forward. Phase two of this project will actually demolish an existing warehouse which is already partially collapsed and replace that with a more functional bay type system. There is also lift systems and parking lot surface maintenance, as well as road repaving projects, which Tom mentioned earlier. We have failed to meet the minimum that we need to meet in order to simply maintain the status of our current street system. And I don't think Tom pointed it out, but it is important to note that we know the condition of Main Street. Main Street is a DelDOT street, as a DelDOT road, and there is a plan to do some patching on that starting in early June, and that should take care of the worst until they come in late this year for about a year and a half and do a full reconstruction. That includes taking out all the concrete asphalt and replacing that with fresh asphalt and doing some ADA upgrades, as I mentioned before. So that is going to be an extensive project, but they will come in for about a week in a few weeks and get some of the worst to hold us over until they get to the bigger project. So as many calls as we get, we give those to DelDOT, and I think they're getting tired of hearing us call. So with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Dave Del Grande to discuss why we're looking at financing these projects using debt and the options that we have based on the fact that we're a municipality. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Del Grande, the Finance Director. Thank you for your time this evening. So ultimately, why? Why now? Why haven't we done this in the past? And what's our plan going in the future? The city's historically used cash to fund the majority of our capital needs. Debt financing accomplishes two main goals. One, that it fairly allocates the cost of the project over its useful life, and this allows everyone to pay their fair share of the cost of the project over the period of the assets being in use. The other is that long-term debt has a minimal impact on the annual budget. thereby keeping the city's annual revenue requirements as low as possible. Low needs for revenue translates directly into lower utility and tax rates and fees that the city must charge for the services that we provide. So we have three options for debt. We have the state revolving loan, bond financing, and your traditional bank loan, which I'll go into all the three. So the state revolving loan is the most advantageous method for us to use and to finance our water-related projects, which would be water, sewer, and stormwater. Due to their federal support, the state is able to offer low-interest loans on a competitive basis to all government agencies within the state of Delaware. And since these loans are competitive in nature, all applications are not always approved, so we need to have a backup plan if a state revolving loan doesn't work for us. Another advantage of this program is that it provides flexibility with interest-only loans during the construction phase in order to provide budget relief to the agencies benefiting from this program. Our involvement in the state revolving loan program will also make us eligible in the future for grants for our water, sewer, and stormwater projects that we previously did not have access to. If all of our water-related programs were not are not approved for a state revolving loan, our fallback plan would be to go to the bond market or go with a bank loan. The bond market route is the most costly, but provides a lower interest rate than a traditional bank loan. Even with the higher fees, a bond authorization is generally the least expensive one once we factor in the interest rates when compared to a bank loan. Bond funding becomes more attractive when we begin borrowing amounts over $10 million. Since the fees associated with bond funding remain relatively fixed regardless of the amount that is being borrowed. The city currently benefits from a bond rating of AA+ from Fitch Ratings and AA2 from Moody's Investor Services, and we would need to go back to the bond use agencies for a reaffirmation of our ratings. A bank loan is a viable option for the city to consider as well. Although they carry a higher interest rate than the bonds, they don't have the high fees that go along with them. So fees for our proposed bond could be about $100,000 to $150,000 less than going with a bank loan. Lower fees when borrowing smaller amounts of money make loans more advantageous to pursue than a full bond offering. And if the referendum were to pass, a bank loan would be considered a possible funding source. So this chart here reflects our current outstanding loan obligations, and they're around $15 million as of today. The green bar represents the debt service being paid back on the reservoir and the South Wellfield project. And $1.3 million of our annual debt service payments through 2022 account for the reservoir by itself. The next largest piece of our annual $2.7 million debt service bill represents the automated meter infrastructure project, or as we call them, the smart meters. The blue bar in this chart represents a payment of $1.1 million annually through 2022. When part of the lease is paid in full. And then the remaining balance of $753,000 a year will continue through 2028. The other items consist of small projects like parking equipment and the fiber project for our city-owned assets and energy efficiency projects for our city buildings. This slide represents the projects that are included in the state revolving loan request. We have one notice of intent in for all of them. We were approved for the Rodney project at up to $9 million, even though we don't plan to spend up to $9 million through DENREC. The state gave us authorization of that amount if that possibility were to happen. Ultimately, it's a special interest rate of 2%, which was a great need for us to lock in that rate. And the state kind of went outside the norm and granted us approval for this project prior to a successful referendum, which is not something that they normally do. So the state was very eager to see this project go through, and we're happy for that. Having a lower interest rate of 2% saves us all money in the end. So as you can see, the remaining water and sewer projects after the 9 total about $15,625,000, and all require approval, like I had mentioned, by the state to be considered for special interest rate. This chart displays the projects earmarked for bond or loan funding, assuming that all of our other projects are approved through the state revolving loan program. All these projects were expected to begin after July this year, pending a successful referendum on June 19th. In total, the total amount of the project list is $26,765,000. add a little more splash of color to our presentation this evening with what our current existing debt service plan looks like if you stack on the potential new referendum. So the referendum will help us allocate the financial obligation over 20 years, as I had mentioned previously. Our current debt service of $2.7 million, which is the green bar, the green at the bottom, will increase to about $3.5 million, which is the peak of the orange in 2022. And then we'll drop down as we get into the out years past 2028. So ultimately, we're sharing the cost of these projects to those who have not moved into the city and those who will be using this infrastructure as we get into those years. So the question we have received a lot is, what if we use cash? If we pay strictly cash for these items, we would have to come up with $26.7 million between now and 2022. And our debt schedule would substantially increase over the next 4 years. The projects that will get completed, but raising such a large amount of cash in a short period would be a challenge if the projects were continued as they exist. Debt service would increase from $2.7 million this year to $5.3 million, and then it increased to $12.5 million in 19. Goes back down to $9 million in 20, then 5.6, 7.1. So it's a seesaw up and down until it settles back at $752,000 in 2023. And it's a bumpy ride. It's not an easy way, an easy budget process going year over year with this type of cash requirement. And it's also a not easy thing for your pocketbooks. Every year we're coming out with different rates to account for this. So we're getting to the nitty-gritty here. Assuming that no other fees were changed, what would our estimated tax and utility rates look like if we continue with these projects? The top box above represents if we were to go with cash financing. That's basically raising fees, raising revenue, which could be tax, utility rates, a combination of both, to get to the cash numbers we need to finance these projects. If you look at 2018, for example, that's where we are today, no change, but moving out to 2019, you would see an overall increase of about 12.7% in the checks that you write to the city of Newark every year. That would then change to a 2% overall increase in 2020, drop in 2021 by 7%, and then drop 6% in 2022. So it's a bit of an up and down approach. Moving forward with debt financing, where we have a fixed amount that we borrow, and it's predictable and more easy to put into our annual budget plan, you can see more of a consistent approach where we have a 1% total increase in 19, 0.4% in 20, 0.5% in 2021, and 0.8% in 2022. So these are all estimates, but it's based on the current timelines that we're using and based on the current dollar amounts that we project that we're going to need, and based on the rates that we're seeing. So that's all my big asterisks next to all these numbers. But what we're trying to show is it's a more of a logical means that we can build into our budgetary requirements year over year. And with debt service, it's revenue numbers that are smaller to meet and to find income for versus trying to find $26 million over a 3-year, 4-year period. So taking these percentages to dollars, this is what we're looking at. Today, the average Newark resident is paying about $276 a month to the city when you factor in water, sewer, stormwater, and your tax bill. That's for all of our services. If we were to go cash, you would see a $35 a month increase in your total bills to the city. Then followed in 2020 of another $6.20. Then we would drop it back down to 21 and 22 because the majority of the cash was gathered for those projects 18 through 20. So moving down to debt service, your $276 bill would now go up $2.70 a month in 19. Then it would go up $1 a month in 20, $1.46 a month in 22. I'm sorry, in 21, $2.33 in 22. So the majority of that $2.70, $1 of that is the Rodney project in and of itself. So we're not talking very large numbers when we're able to allocate the cost of these projects over the useful lives of these assets. So at this point, I will turn it back to Tom.
All right, thank you, Dave. So what's the process from here? In Newark, the referendum process is strictly spelled out in our city charter. In order to meet the charter requirements, we developed this timeline. Assuming council decided to proceed, which they did on May 14th. So back on April 23rd, we set a resolution that fixed the public hearing date, which was May 14th. May 14th, council approved the questions for the referendum. I apologize, I forgot to put a slide together detailing what the actual questions are. So there will be 4 questions on the June 19th referendum. Don't hold me to the order because I don't have the official ballot yet. There will be 1 question for Rodney, which will be the first question, purchase of the property, development of the pond, et cetera. Second question for Rodney will be the park features. The third question would be our state revolving loan fund projects, so water and sewer, and water and sewer projects. And then the fourth question will be everything that's in the general fund or parking fund, and that's it in this case. So they'll be funded with traditional bond funding or a loan. So June 19th, as I mentioned, would be the referendum date, and then after that, we would, over the next few weeks, finalize the results and that. So assuming we have a positive result in the referendum, we'll work with council to proceed with securing financing for the various projects. But if the referendum fails, we'll have to reconsider our capital budget and work with council to reprioritize the projects and raise additional revenue as necessary to go the kind of whipsaw route that Dave outlined. Now, before I go forward, I'm going to go back real quick to highlight something on Dave's slide. So it's important to note that this graph only contemplates the projects that are in this 5-year capital plan. So starting in 2023, it wouldn't stay flat like that. It would just whipsaw with the next 5-year capital plan. So we envision as a city, staff at least, working some form of debt into the city's capital program into the future. Ideally, it wouldn't be quite as extreme as what we're doing here, where we have to do a lot of projects with debt. But we could envision doing the one-off projects, the non-recurring projects. So like our water main replacement, that is something we would like to see paid for with cash each year because it's pretty steady. It's easy to budget for. But projects like our water treatment plant projects or one-offs that cause big giant jumps like Rodney, those are things that we'll look to utilize debt for over the coming years. So going back. We're putting all this information up on the city's website at the above address, newarkde.gov/vote. We've also set up a specific email address. We set it up for this project. It's asknewark@newark.de.us. But you can email any question you have about Newark to that address, and we'll get it to the right person and get you an answer. We've also developed a frequently asked questions document that will be up on the /vote website. With a lot of the questions that we've gotten over the last few public hearings. So I don't know if I mentioned it, this is the 4th public hearing. So I apologize we've reused the same slideshow. I forgot to put in the actual question slide, so I'll have that addressed for the next one. But at this point, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out, and we'll open up the floor to any questions you may have. Everyone shy? Any questions? All right, in the back.
Hi, Tom. Bob Herman. The question I have pertains to the Rodney stormwater project. Along the lines, if the city did not have this opportunity to buy the Rodney site, okay, has there been a study done for Plan B? What would be the cost associated for remedying the stormwater runoff by maybe making the downstream capacity larger than it is? It runs down through the Star campus into Silverbrook and the Christina River. What's the cost, the comparative cost for increasing that flow rate, that capacity, compared to what you propose? Is very well proposed and a variety of options and so forth, and it looks like it could be a compelling goal, but again, what's the alternative cost? If we didn't have this opportunity, there's another way to remedy the situation, and and that's presumably to increase the capacity to handle water flow downstream from that point.
Yeah, I can. All right, thank you. That's a very good question. So one of the things that we talked about. So okay, so in case you didn't hear it, have we done an analysis to see what would the cost be to do what we're proposing to do with Rodney some other way? If we didn't have the opportunity to do Rodney, how would we do it? So one of the things that's somewhat unique to the issues that we're having. So Rodney is around up here, and then our storm sewer system that it flows into kind of flows down. I think it's Beverly Road. Is it Beverly? Through Phillips Park, through the Star Campus, down through Silverbrook and into the Christina. And the pipe system in Devon and the bins ties into that same pipe system on Star Campus. So one of the issues that we have is that, so Devon and the bins flood a lot. South Main Street floods just downstream from the underpass. And some of the neighborhoods in here in Old Newark have some flooding issues as well. But we also have a problem down in Silverbrook at the bottom of the watershed. So one of the issues we have is if we just go in and put in big pipes, it will make the flooding worse downstream where they're already having some flooding. So for us, just putting in bigger pipes won't necessarily work, or it may work, or it would be very difficult to make work. So if we wanted if we want to put in bigger pipes, and that ultimately that's what Rodney allows us to do. So by having Rodney up here at the top, it captures around 70 acres of untreated, unmanaged stormwater from the neighborhoods up here. So we'll hold that water back. It frees up capacity in the existing storm sewer system, and then we can put in some larger pipes and more inlets down here in these neighborhoods and help get the water off the streets and into the pipe system. So if we wanted to do the same thing, we would need to acquire land in the same watershed, ideally towards the top. So we'd be talking about buying homes, trying to amass a group of homes in one area. It would be tremendously expensive and take a long time unless we wanted to go eminent domain, which I don't think anyone in this room wants to do that. So it would be very difficult to do. Just purchasing an equivalent amount of land area would be probably north of $9 million at today's real estate rates. So we've gotten a very attractive price from the university for this property. So of the $6.5 million, the purchase price of the land is $2.1 million, and they'll give us a credit of up to $700,000 for the demolition costs for the buildings that are there now. So on net, it's about $1.4 million for 7.5 acres downtown. 58 East Main Street, for example, Main Street property has gone $5 million an acre. The Dickinson property, we have, having talked to developers that put in bids on Dickinson, we know that the winning bid was above $8 million for the land as is for Dickinson. So 1.4, we did pretty well. So the university did, they worked very well with us on that project.
And just to add a little bit, we have gotten a question, what about Phillips Park? There is a detention basin in Phillips Park. You may not notice it as a detention basin because it's predominantly wetland and phragmites and things now, which are much more difficult to, we can't just open that up now. Maybe 50 years ago, it would have been possible to clean that out and make it a little bigger. In today's environmental world, we cannot do that without substantial costs and remediation. So, and again, this is at the top of the drainage area. That gets closer to the middle of the drainage area. So Tom mentioned a 70-acre drainage area to the pond. It's actually the total drainage area is about 650, say 700. So you're looking at about 10% of the drainage area that we can essentially take out of the equation for a period of time.
Yeah. So one other question we've gotten a lot, kind of in the same vein, is, well, what do we do if the referendum fails? What happens to the property? Or do we have any other alternatives for purchasing the property? So in our contract with UD, there is a term where we can purchase it over time. I think we pay a 4 or 5% interest rate on that, and they'll allow us to buy it over several years. It wouldn't deal with demolishing the building. We'd be paying a higher interest rate, and then we'd have this building to deal with sitting on a property that we own. So that's not necessarily ideal. If we don't buy it, the underlying zoning is RM, which is multifamily garden apartments. So 16 units per acre could be put there. So we're looking at potentially upwards of 110 apartment units in that, on that one
A
parcel.
small caveat to that is that because of the environmental remediation necessary, they would have to do some extra steps to make sure to make it feasible to put residential units on the property.
Yeah.
So, and it's also worth noting that we're getting quite a bit of money from the brownfields program through the state of Delaware because it is a brownfield site. It's qualified as a brownfield site and we're qualified as a brownfield developer. So we're getting quite a bit of money for the remediation of that site based on its current situation.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yep, back.
Thank you. The presentation started with total replacement costs and then segued a little bit into like remaining service life and things like that. And then at the end, Tom, you indicated that, and I know I've read this once before, that it's your intentions or the city's intentions that in 5 years, when we're back here again for another referendum, are you able to state with any certainty, you know, what would that next referendum look like? I mean, is this really chipping away at it, or is the next one going to be equally as large, or you know, a longer term look?
That's a great question, and one that I can say Dave, Tim, and I have had a lot of conversation about. So if I had to go into the crystal ball and make an estimation, so over the next 5 years, we'll be doing main replacement, we'll be doing condition assessment to try and identify better, more accurately what the condition of our remaining assets that we haven't assessed are. But the big item for me is this. So by then we'll be here. At that point, you know, 21% of our mains will be expired, minus I guess 3.5 miles or so, and we'll be looking at this wave coming. It's kind of like the first echo of development post World War II. So depending on what we're able to determine through our asset management program, you know, we might be able to spread this out, but it's coming one way or the other. So ultimately, it depends on how accurate we can get our data, how much we can, how fine-tuned we can get it. Realistically, there's no way we're going to be able to replace that. We're not going to keep up. It's financially, it would not be possible. So, you know, realistically, our main break rate's going to go up. I don't see any way that we'll be able to tackle the just with knowing what people can actually afford. Order of magnitude, it's really hard to say. I think at this point, you know, water and sewer wise, we'll be through a lot of the big one-off projects, you know, unless something that we don't see coming happens, like what happened in Blades earlier this year, where they had they detected a perfluorinated compound in their water and had to put in an activated carbon system that's like $1 million. Something like that could happen at any time. We don't see that coming. We've sampled for those types of things, and we don't have them here, but you never really know. But the big thing for us is dealing with our road network, dealing with our water mains. You know, these are the things that I want to do with cash moving forward, but I just don't know if we'll be able to actually afford to do that. One benefit that we didn't get into in the presentation is once we have loans in the SRF program, the State Revolving Loan Fund program, it opens up a whole bunch of new options for us for grants. There's low-income subsidization programs. So as soon as you have a loan from the water SRF, you have access to up to $200,000 a year to help low-income residents pay their water bills. As soon as you have a loan in the sewer fund, you have similarly access to $200,000 to help low-income residents. There's income tests and things like that. But those are things that we don't have access to today that we would have access to by the end of the year if we get into this program. There are asset management grants. So if we're paying, let's say, $100,000 in interest on our loans through the asset management program, if we apply and are accepted, they'll give us up to half of that back. So they effectively half our interest rate on our loans and give it to us to do stuff, to do this, to figure out what we need to do and help us manage our system more effectively. Because they know it creates a pipeline of projects that will help sustain the SRF program. So for those that don't know, so the State Revolving Loan Fund program is a program that starts at the federal government. EPA gives all the states, they call them capitalization grants. So Delaware gets $10 million for water, $10 million for sewer, and I think 10 for stormwater as well. And they go into a pot. And then the state makes loans out of that And the interest and the loan payments come back and they refill the pot. So every year there's $10 million more going into it, plus all the principal and interest payments from all the loans they've made. So over time, this pot gets bigger, and it gets to a certain point where the state starts giving out grants because they have more money than they can give away, basically. So they'll do planning grants and other grants like that. And those are grants that we'd be eligible for through this program in the back.
But that's still a tax.
It is. So
Whether it comes from this pot over here, this pot there, it originally comes from this pot.
yes, and I,
So
yeah.
after a while, you get tired of hearing that we're gonna do this with this money from here, this from this money from there. You're getting it from us.
No, I agree. And if you were over here earlier before the meeting, I said just that thing. But the difference is that if the program at the federal level is happening whether we participate or not. So either we can participate and use those grants here for our residents, or we can sit it out and Texas can get them, or Minnesota or somebody else. But until there's a change at the federal level, the best thing we can do is selfishly take advantage of the programs that are there. At least that's my opinion. Otherwise, somebody else will. And then you're paying for their projects.
Can I add something,
Yeah.
Tom, real quick? Just one thing Tom mentioned a will on council to make some changes so that our revenues don't fluctuate the way that Tom mentioned they had earlier. So essentially, we're using the debt financing for this round, and they're looking, hopefully, and make some changes to the structures and the way we actually bill our customers so that we can get out of this situation and have a more even, steady revenue stream. And
Right.
I usually don't talk revenue, Dave. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear that we have a will on council to kind of fix the problems that that we've had over the past few decades, and make sure that we don't find ourselves in the same situation.
Yeah, that's very true. So one of the things that we're working with council to do this fall is to try and put in a customer charge. So right now, if you use 0 gallons of water, you get a bill for $0. Now, while that's great for the person that lives in that unit and was on vacation or whatever, but while you were on vacation, if your house caught on fire, the fire company could still hook up to our main and put out the fire. That water will still be available for you when you come back. It would be available for you if you had someone come to the house when you weren't there. So there's a value inherent. We still had to mail you a bill. So in that case, we lost money by having you as a customer. So we're looking to implement a customer charge that would reduce how much our revenue fluctuates over the course of the year, over the course year to year. Like I mentioned, at one point we've lost, our water utility has underperformed historical averages by $3 million over the last 3 years, just because weather has been wet, people haven't been using water. And as a result of that, that's $3 million that could have been used to that or funded some of these projects. So we're going to try and get a customer charge in place that will help to address some of the revenue inconsistency that we've had.
I was just wanted to comment about what you said about the money coming from us, but I think we will all benefit from this. So it's really for us too. So.
Thank you.
I have a question about the electrical substation and why it's not included in any of these major projects.
So is that the one at Star Campus? Okay. So for those of you who maybe don't attend as many meetings as the McKelveys, so there was a large project. It's about $10 million for a new substation at Star Campus. So you may or may not know it, but all the electric to the city of Newark comes into one place, and it's off Paper Mill Road, right near the bridge over the White Clay Creek. So that one substation is not really at capacity, but it's pretty close to capacity. So when Star Campus builds out, realistically, it can only build to about 40% of their anticipated load, somewhere around there, before we're going to have to either make significant upgrades at that one Kershaw station, or create a second point of access feed from Delmarva into our system. So the plan is, as part of the STAR development, that they will give us a piece of land down at Star Campus, they being University of Delaware, large enough for a second feed. So the benefit to us, our substation transformer, if something happens to that transformer, it's like a 9-month lead time to get a replacement. Meanwhile, we don't have any power. So it's not a good setup. So we want to get a second point of feed. Most other towns either have one or are in the process of getting one. So as we move forward, It's not in the 5-year plan because we know what UD's current build schedule is, and we know they're not going to exceed the amount that we need in the near term. Ultimately, our hope over the next 5 years is to get into place some impact fees or capital cost recovery charges. So developers, when they come in, if they're adding load, we'll basically charge them a certain dollar amount for each unit of load, and then we'll take that money and we'll put it into a savings account for that substation transformer. So development over the next few years hopefully will drive revenue that we can set aside and buy. Otherwise, we have some options to finance through Delaware Municipal Electric Corporation, which is the public power group that we're a part owner of, or we could do debt financing in the future if we don't have enough money when the time comes to need to do it. But the good thing is, so we bring in around $50 million a year in revenue, electric revenue, for the whole city, 53, 54, something like that. At build out, Star Campus would be looking at like another $30 million a year. So a $10 million substation, when it brings in $30 million of revenue, that's good math. You know, Dave can make that work.
Yeah,
so it's good for us to get that going.
I have two short questions about the actual water project at Rodney. One is, from the way you've described it, is the way this would operate that during periods of high rainfall, the water level would rise, and then later on in the weeks following, you would release that water through the existing storm source, so the water level will be constantly going up and down like the reservoir?
Yeah.
Okay. Second
Just
question is,
real quick, sorry, let me interrupt one.
There you go.
I don't think I'm on.
You're on.
We don't turn a valve on and off. It actually it comes in and goes out within 48 hours, so it's not in the weeks, past. So I just wanted to clarify that. There's not a valve that we open and close. It's just a structure that lets it go in and out.
Second question is, I don't see Oakland's pool area there, and I'm just sort of,
Right here.
oh, is it? So it's off the map?
It's off the map.
So this does not include, as far south as that, this is all north of that project?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the other dorm area that's south of there that goes all the way to Barksdale or Apple Road?
Okay. All right, so the other parcels, that's Dickinson parcel. The University of Delaware has put out a contract to sell that, and they are negotiating with the buyer. They have not finalized the buyer, and they have not finalized the contract. They have not told us who they're negotiating with, so it's all pretty hush-hush right now. I have heard from a bidder that participated. Lang Development was one of the bidders on it. They did not get it, so I know it's not them. But other than that, they haven't told us much. But it is for sale. It's also zoned RM, 16 units per acre. So depending on who buys it, realistically, probably student apartments, if I had to guess, just based off what everything else is. But at this time, we don't know.
Will they still be subjected to the planning requirements and everything, because it won't be university property anymore, right?
Correct. So those of you who may not know, so the university is exempt from our zoning. So if UD wants to build housing for their students, for the 5,500 students they're bringing, they decide they're going to do it all in dorms, they can put it wherever they want. They can build it to look however they want it to look. They can build towers on Winslow. They could do whatever they wanted. But by using the private developers, those developers have to come through our process. They have to comply with our comprehensive development plan, with our zoning ordinances, get approval from council. So with Dickinson, since they're looking to sell that, it will be on the developer to bring it through. It'll follow our normal development processes. So we do have some say in the development. So that's why it's critical when we move forward and look to how are we going to address this wave of students that are going to be coming over the next 5 to 10 years. We need to have a conversation at council, which they've started. The planning commission had a meeting on the 15th to discuss it, of where do the students want to be, where can we put them, where they cause, I'm not going to say the least harm, or the least impact on the neighborhoods around those areas. So that's a conversation that's ongoing at the council level.
Absentee ballots?
Yes, so we will have absentee ballots. They're available at the city secretary's office. You can come get you can fill out an affidavit. It's a 2-step process, and then we mail you the absentee ballot once we receive them, and they are available. Kelly's.
Or if they go to City Hall, they can do it all.
Yeah, if you go to City Hall, you can do it at 1 step. But I don't know if we have the ballots yet. We don't have them yet.
I might have some.
my experience, I've seen flooding down in the lower areas where this stormwater goes to, but I have not experienced any financial damages to residents and so forth. It's mostly street flooding, which dissipates within, a couple hours of when the storm ends. I would think that, given that, I'd like to get a response to that question first off, but if there isn't a strong need down in the watershed for providing the stormwater management area, it seems like all these other projects and the piping and the infrastructure that is going to fail eventually just makes sense to me to put the money into the infrastructure where the money is needed.
So we have had that question a few times. So most of the flooding that's in the watershed is, like you said, it's maintained in streets. It does require us to close. We've had to close South Main Street. So I've been with the city since 2011. We've had to close South Main Street to vehicle traffic 3 times in 6 years during the storm. Like you said, it's not for that long, but if you're in an ambulance and you need to get somewhere during that period, that's a problem. So over in Devon, the bins, we had some residents come in talking about how the water was up to the side view mirrors of their trucks, and I didn't believe them. And then they brought me a picture with the water up to the side view mirror of the truck. So I believe them now. So I was very surprised at how extensive the flooding was.
Just real quick, I know we tend to focus on flooding because that's what you can see. We also have another component, is the water quality component of that, which actually is another federal program. So whilst we can't necessarily be fined for flooding, we can actually be fined for the quality of our water. So in this watershed, like I said, there are very little existing stormwater management features or stormwater management facilities. So this will enable us to treat some of that water. And again, it doesn't necessarily affect our drinking water because it's below our intake, and it's on a different creek than our intake. But this water eventually goes down and joins with White Clay Creek, Christina, and is where Suez Water, United Water, Delaware takes their water to serve about 400,000 residents in Delaware. So it is eventually someone's drinking water, and I know that there's other water downstream that it mixes in with, but we have to do our part according to the federal government, and we can be fined for not doing our part. So we have a full stormwater program, stormwater quality program that includes education, and a lot of the items, in my opinion, education is great, but when you actually put something in the ground that cleans the water, that's when you're looking, that's when you're actually making a difference.
Yeah. The big thing, like I said, meeting our water quality requirements of our federal permits. Our permit right now is about 15 years old, I think. It's been extended 3 times. They've been telling us the new permit's coming, I think, since I've been at the city. We're convinced it's actually coming in the next 12 months. Yes, we've seen a draft of it, and while it doesn't have numerical requirements explicitly, they're coming, and anything that we do here will help us meet those requirements into the future. So we feel like it's a win-win-win. We get the parkland downtown, we meet our water quality requirements, and we get to address some of this nuisance flooding that really is a quality of life issue for a lot of the neighborhoods in Devon, the Bins, some minor spots in Old Newark, and then South Main Street itself. And ultimately, if at the end you still don't think it's the right thing, that's why we did 4 questions. So you can choose which ones are the right choice for you, or which ones you feel you support. But we feel as staff that all 4 questions are merited and worth doing. So.
I think Dave said he had some ballots.
The university owns land now, and plan is to purchase it from the university. When did the university acquire the land, and has it always, I assume it hasn't always didn't always belong to the university, or did it always?
That's correct, it did not.
No, it did not. I believe the deeds are from somewhere in the early 60s. It was transferred over as part of a land transfer that actually gave them Most of the site there, and then a small portion along Forest Lane belonged to someone who, according to what I've read, either kept the property until they passed or until their estate was settled, and then that reverted to university ownership. So sometime in the early to mid 60s.
So they didn't actually have to pay for the pay for the land?
I do not. I'd have to go back and look at the deed. I'm saying it may have reverted to university ownership, but they may have paid something to the estate, before that happened. I'm not completely aware. I know that it wasn't. I don't believe it was built upon until the university came in and built the dorms. And at the same time as when the Oakland's neighborhood was beginning to take shape. Hillside Road actually did not go all the way through at that time. Apple Road went over and made a left, and then Hillside stopped at West Main, I believe, which was still open.
Yeah, we've had some residents during the Rodney public outreach process tell us that it used to be a kind of a marshy area that prior to being the dorms, which would make sense considering it's essentially a big funnel from the Oaklands down to that one location where Rodney is and then through. So that would make sense with what we're seeing. So we're going to stick around for a little while. If anyone was maybe not comfortable speaking in front of the group, we'll be here to answer any questions you have.